ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Mark Blunden and this is The Leader. It's 2 decades since the launch of the contemporary art fair that secured London's place at the centre of the modern art world. Frieze London celebrates 20 years since its first event for high-end art buyers who've got at least a few thousand and much more to splurge. As well as the contemporary fair in Regent's Park with works by artists including Tracey Emin, Damien Hirst, Yinka, Shonibare and Grayson, Perry, there's also another section called Masters that specialises in pieces from the ancient to the modern era. So that's a good bet for bagging that Picasso or a £20 million dinosaur. This year's event also marks a new campaign backed by The Standard to salute the capital's successes in the arts called London Creates, which was established to promote our visual art scene and is being supported by Mayor Sadiq Khan and artists including Gilbert and George, who contributed 2 special collector's editions, Evening Standard Art for All for Art front pages, if you were lucky enough to snap up a copy from the newsstands. The campaign celebrates London's newest galleries, museums and public art across our city, and this follows the Standard's successful art prize. Stay tuned to the end of this podcast to hear about the highlights. Shortly we'll hear all about London Creates, but first here's Frieze London director Eva Langret on the evolution of the annual event.
I think the art world around us has changed, I think when Frieze London started 20 years ago, the scene in London was really quite tiny, and now it's grown a lot and it's become much more professional. And I think, this week we've seen also lots of new galleries opening in London, new spaces opening. So I think it really shows how much we've grown as a city, as a cultural capital for the arts in the last 20 years. I'm a Parisian, so I've moved to London for a reason. I think London is an incredible center, global magnet for artists from all over the world. I think the ecosystem here is so deeply rooted and so expensive that I don't think the position of London could ever be replaced by any other city.
This year, some household name artists are promoting some of their favourite up-and-coming creatives too.
The 8 artists who have nominated include Simone Lee, Tracey Emin, Wolfgang Tillmans, Olafur Eliasson, Alvaro Barrington, Anthea Hamilton, and Hegi Yang. And each of them has selected an artist whose work they're interested in, an artist who wouldn't be at the fair if it wasn't for this invitation. So this was very much about using artists' networks and knowledge to platform new voices.
Now we're joined by The Standard's arts correspondent, Robert Dex, for the lowdown on this year's Frieze London. Rob, what's it all about?
It's basically probably best described as the art world, or the international art world, come to London and live in a tent for 5 days. It's obviously a bit more than that, but a massive tent goes up in Regent's Park. Galleries, 160 this year, come to buy and sell. And there's also, and as always with these things, it's the stuff around the edges. So there's talks, there's films, there's just actually people just sort of connecting over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. That actually is probably where the real business gets done. But yeah, it's the international art world comes to London for a week, essentially.
Could you tell us the difference between the 2 shows?
Frieze is sort of the whole thing, and Frieze was very much set up during sort of the rise of Tracey Emin, Damien Hirst, people like that. It was all about contemporary British art. Frieze Masters basically just allows them to put in and sell artwork that is not contemporary. It was described to me this week rather nicely as Frieze Masters. You can see how art was changing and modernism was coming in, and then you walk over to Frieze and you see the actual cutting edge of where it is right now. So Frieze Masters is almost like the history, if you see what I mean. So if you're selling a Picasso, you sell it at Frieze Masters. If you're selling something literally the paint is still drying, you sell it at Frieze.
And there are some household name artists with their works on sale at the right price?
Yes, there are big names you've heard of. Whether you've got a chance to buy depends very much on your disposable income. So already sales we've seen, a Tracey Emin painting went for 1.2 million. Anthony Gormley, one of his sculptures, went for about 500,000. 6 figures for works by people like Gilbert and George. Everything is relative. But I mean, certainly you could get a Tracey Emin print for about £50,000. Now, £50,000 is a huge amount of money, but it is a considerably less money than 1.2 million for a painting. So let's be honest, me and you aren't walking in to buy these things. But if you have disposable income of a certain amount, or if you're often buying for galleries or whatever, you can spend less if you try hard. Let's put it that way.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up, hear all about London Creates and why the capital's still head and shoulders above the global creative competition. Why not hit follow in the meantime and give us a rating? Welcome back. Rob, what's London's place in the 21st century art world, and who's the competition?
New York is massive, obviously, but we are one of the biggest art markets in the world. I mean, I spent a lot of time pandemic and post-pandemic writing about, theatre was under threat, museums were struggling, all these sorts of things. The one thing that did not struggle throughout the pandemic was, if you like, high-end auction houses. People were still selling and buying high-end art for millions and millions and millions and millions of pounds. So it always thrives. And if you think about high-end auction houses, you think about Sotheby's and Christie's. Now, they obviously have bases around the world, but those are firms with hundreds of years of history in London, and nothing's going to change that. So we are always a significant player. I mean, Frieze started in London, and it's now out in New York and Seoul. So, if you like, our success has spread around the world. Something set up by a couple of people who were big fans of contemporary art and thought it needed something of its own, has become like a multi-million-pound international business.
And tell us about London Creates. How's that helping open up the capital's art scene for everyone?
This again goes back to Frieze. Somebody said to me, he has a gallery that sells in Frieze, and he was saying, I get people come to see me in Frieze that would not go and see similar works of art in, say, the National Gallery or the Tate, because Frieze is seen as more of an event, and some people just think, I can't be bothered with going into the gallery. So part of London Creates is to be constantly reminding people, look, there is all this amazing stuff on your doorstep. And we've talked about money, haven't we? The huge amounts of money you need if you want to put a Tracey Emin on your wall, or if you want to put something like that on your wall. Now, it's not the same, but you can go and see that stuff for free in the Tate, in Tate Modern, in Tate Britain, in the National Gallery, in the National Portrait Gallery. There's a huge David Hockney exhibition coming to the National Portrait Gallery with, everyone's seen this picture he did of Harry Styles. You can go and see that. You can step out your front door, get on the tube and go and see it. And I think it's just about reminding people what's there, basically.
Tell us about Gilbert and George's involvement.
Gilbert and George actually are interesting because they are such a London institution. They're an East London institution, that practically everyone who lives in East London has at some point walked past them in the street and stopped and thought, hang on, that's Gilbert and George. But it was only last year that they've actually just opened their own gallery just off Brick Lane. So as well as, being supportive of what we're trying to do and what the mayor's trying to do, they're putting their money where their mouth is. They've put their collection on show to the public. They've built a new gallery. And you think, not that many years ago, we were wondering whether places like that were ever reopened. And was there a future for galleries, for museums in this city? And so all credit to them. I mean, yes, fabulous artists, brilliant eccentrics, but also they've made a hard-nosed business case for opening a gallery in East London. So more power to them.
And what's exciting you on London's art scene right now?
What I would say is, and this sounds like blowing our own trumpet, and perhaps it is, in that the Evening Standard has just recently won its art prize, which was for new and up-and-coming artists. And what was great about that is they largely fell into two sort of groups. There were some who were either still at college or had just left college, so still just starting out. And there were others who were often slightly older and perhaps created art as well as holding down a job or just retired and sort of finally been able to do what they wanted to do. So that was great, and it was really heartening to see some of the stuff that we got sent. I mean, we had a guy, a sculptor called Joseph Ijomi, who made these amazing, what I would call paper boats, sort of like you'd make out of folded paper, but made them out of metal, very, very thin metal, from the hull of the Cutty Sark in Greenwich. And they were just absolutely fantastic. But he was absolutely brilliant. And what was great about that, we had sculpture, we had the winner made a sort of installation from old telephone bills that were from phone calls between her and her grandmother in the Caribbean. And she was fantastic. And, it was really heartening to see all these people just doing their own thing. You can't move for artists. The trick is finding a way that we can hopefully get what they're making out to the public. And hopefully the Standards Art Prize did some of that. But what was also interesting was they were all, particularly the young ones, were so big on social media. And in particular, obviously, Instagram works for art. And that's how they reach customers. People would see it on Instagram, send them a message saying, I really like that, how much is it? And they'd buy it, which is, I mean, there'll always be a place for galleries and art fairs. I'm not saying that's gone forever, but that was really great that, they were literally making their own art, selling their own art. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's very, very difficult, but they were doing it on their own, almost off their own bat. And that was great, that sort of sense of independence.
There's much more news and features in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. That's The Leader. We're back on Monday at 4 p.m.